Hello? 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 Hi, everyone. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. A few people are still coming in, and people are joining online, so we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Hello? Is it working? I can't tell. So if you can take your seats, please, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get started in just a minute. And if you can hear me online as well, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. People are still sitting down over here in Brussels. Sorry? Okay, I'm just trying to check if anybody's still outside. Hopefully we won't start too late. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Residence Palace and to this presentation for the launch of the 2022 EUAA Asylum reports. I'm very happy that not only do we have people physically in the room here with us in Brussels, but of course, as has been the case now for the last few years, we have, I believe, several hundred attendants online on the Zoom platform. And so a big welcome to them who are watching us remotely as well. This report, my name is, actually, let me introduce myself. My name is Anis Kassar. I'm the head of communication here at the EUAA. It's my pleasure to moderate this event this morning. We have 2 sessions for you to present this report. The report is, of course, as it's now very well established, it's the first report under our new mandate, but of course we had it under the EASA before. It is, of course, the go-to source of information on the state of asylum, of international protection, asylum, and reception in the European Union. As Commissioner Johansson had said, I believe it was last year, it is anybody who works in asylum and reception and migration should have this report on their desk. Of course, we now are going green, so it should be on your desktop rather than on your desk, hopefully. So today, of course, this report covers primarily developments in 2021, so last year, but it would be remiss, of course, to ignore what's been happening over the last few months as well. This has been a period of significant international developments, which have international, both regional and global, I must say, which have had a significant impact on international protection developments in the EU. And if I personally was to summarize it in, let's say, one sentence, I would say that this report underlines not only that the fact that the Common European Asylum System does have the tools, and we've seen this, it does have the tools to properly implement and implement international protection standards, but also the last couple of months and years have also highlighted that more needs to be done in terms of implementation primarily. And so this is a recurring theme within the report and a recurring theme which you'll hear also this morning. We have two sessions this morning. The first, we have a panel, well, we have actually, we're going to have a keynote address by our Executive Director, Ms. Nina Gregori, followed by a presentation, a more detailed presentation on the report and its findings and its context by Mr. Bernard Chiari, who's the head of the unit which is in charge of the report. And they're joined on stage by two colleagues, Friedrich and Judith, who are both part of the teams which drafted the report. The report takes a lot of work, lots of months of intense work and research and consultations to put together. And so they are here to then answer questions, to help the colleagues answer questions when we have the question and answer session. Speaking of question and answers, we have two question and answer sessions for you this morning, one after the first session and one after the panel discussion, which is later on in the morning. For those here in the room, you have a microphone in your armrest. So if you lift up your armrest, you will see a microphone and a little button which says speak. So please press that button when you're asking a question. And when you are asking a question, I will of course point you out, and please give your name and association if possible. For those joining us online, in order to keep things technically running smoothly, I will have a tablet in front of me, and I'll ask you to please put your questions in writing in the question and answer tab, which you see at the bottom of your screen, and then I will read them out to the panelists here. So I think I've covered everything from my end. We're running just a bit behind schedule, so without any further ado, I'll pass the floor to Ms. Nina Gregori, the Executive Director of the EUAA.
Yes, thank you very much, Anis, for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear friends, I'm really, really happy to see you here in Brussels. It's such a beautiful day today, and a long time haven't we seen each other face to face. So we're happy with the team that, of course, we had this opportunity again to be here and share, of course, the annual report of 2022 today with you. So let me just say that, of course, I warmly welcome those here present in the room, and of course also all those remotely connected. You know that last 2 years we have been just remotely connected. So indeed, I'm happy that in still hybrid situations are, I think, highly valid, and we're happy that, of course, a lot of people has joined us also online. The past year has been one of significant international developments. This crisis, as is almost always the case with instability and, of course, with violence, have primarily impacted civilians and vulnerable people. They have led to an increase of around 1/3 in asylum applications in Europe last year, reaching almost 650,000 and nearing pre-COVID levels. Earlier this year, we have seen the highest number of monthly applications since so-called refugee crisis in 2015 and 16. And our colleagues in Frontex have similarly reported a dramatic 82% increase in irregular border crossings in the first part of this year. There have been three main drivers for these increasing numbers, namely the instrumentalization of migrants by Belarus regime, the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan last summer, and of course the war in Ukraine. In this morning's panel discussion, we will talk about 7 million Ukrainians who have found safety in Europe. I would argue that the unprecedented activation of the Temporary Protection Directive is a watershed moment in many ways. It has been used precisely as it was originally intended to back in 2001. More generally, the invasion of Ukraine has exposed what we always knew to be true. The that the only certain thing about the need for international protection is that it will never go away. There are now over 100 million forcibly displaced people around the world, and that is more than 1% of the global population. More than ever, we live in a world of uncertainty and instability. Traditional causes of migration, and therefore traditional routes which primarily impact Europe south, apply less and less. None of those three drivers that I've mentioned earlier led directly to increased applications in southern member states. Rather, they impacted the East. In my opinion, the recognition of this reality, particularly at a political level, will be significant for the future of the common European asylum system. Undoubtedly, solidarity remains the key stumbling block for progress, but we also see signs of progress in this area, including the overwhelming response to help Ukrainian refugees, and also on the legislative note, where the French presidency of the Council recently making progress on such difficult files. A modern, proactive EU asylum system is within reach if the political will is found. European acquis is already amongst the world's most advanced. What often lacks is proper implementation. The next few months will be crucial in building and sustaining momentum in carrying this process forward. Europe already should be proud of what we have accomplished together in 20 years in building the world's only multinational asylum system. It is a remarkable achievement, and while there is so much to do to improve its application, one cannot imagine what the alternative would be. Before passing over to Mr. Bernard Chiari, our head of Situational Awareness Unit in the agency, who will present the findings of the report, I would also like to highlight one major recent development within the modernization of the EU's asylum system, namely the new mandate of our asylum agency. The transformation from European Asylum Support Office to EUAA, so European Union Agency for Asylum, on the 19th of January was significant in several ways. Not only did it give the agency the ability to deploy operational assistance very quickly, including through an asylum reserve pool of 500 EU member states experts, but it gives us the mandate to deploy new tools, new products, new training that will continue to enhance convergence. Starting from next year, EUAA will gradually also be able to monitor the application of the EU's asylum acquis and help member states identifying and address shortcomings. And this will allow the development that should not be undermined. Operationally, our agency is deploying assistance to member states at an unprecedented level now. We are struggling to keep up with the requests for deployment supporting national asylum and reception authorities. We have gone from 3 operations just a few years ago to 2,000 personnel in 11 and soon to be 12 member states working hand in hand on the ground with authorities. We have recently also deployed our first operational coordination support in a third country, namely in Moldova, in the context of the Ukraine crisis. All this is a recognition of how important our agency has become to asylum and migration management in Europe. More importantly, it is an acknowledgement by member states that well-managed asylum and migration in line with the EU's highest standards requires a European approach. Taken together with the fast-changing political and international environment, which we are all witnessing, I believe that there is a real potential to upgrade the EU's asylum legislation and practices, creating a modern, flexible, efficient, and most importantly, protective system. It is time to stop being reactive and shift to proactively establishing a system that works for everyone, for the national governments, for asylum and reception authorities, for taxpayers, and of course for those who need protection in the European Union. That is my vision for our agency. Ladies and gentlemen, in the words of Commissioner Johansson, as Anis mentioned, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, the EUAA Asylum report is the go-to source that should be on the desk or, as you said, Anis, on the computer of anyone working on asylum or migration in Europe. It is a very unique publication which brings together and contextualizes the information and data relating to how our asylum and reception system works. I hope you will find the rest of this morning presentation and discussion interesting. I encourage you to ask questions during our 2 Q&A sessions, and I thank you very much for your attention. I will pass now the floor to Bernard, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for this introduction. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to present the Asylum Report 2022 to you, the flagship product of the European Union Agency for Asylum. With 385 pages, the report truly is the Anna Karenina among our many reports and analyses. The report provides a comprehensive overview of key developments in asylum and international protection in 2021 and early 2022. 2021 and early 2022 has seen a spike in arrivals from Afghanistan, via Belarus, and from Ukraine. In several member states, these flows were exacerbated by large secondary movements of applicants or even beneficiaries who had stayed in another member state before. The national asylum systems had to deal with a return to pre-pandemic levels of applications, increasing by 1/3 in 2021. In response, EU plus countries had to quickly adapt by facilitating the lodging process for an asylum application. National authorities were required to rearrange reception places and arrival centers and create new reception capacity. The Asylum Report documents these events, but it also helps to understand the present and to be prepared for the future. It depicts how Europe is dealing with migration from Ukraine, with over 7 million people having fled the country since February 2022. And if you have a look at the news in Kremenchuk yesterday, a shopping mall with 1,000 people in it was hit by a Russian missile, with 18 deaths and 50 people missed so far. So nobody knows how this war will go on and what Ukraine and Europe and the world, what is still waiting for us coming from Ukraine. The Asylum Report makes you understand where we stand with the reform of the Common European Asylum System. Last but not least, the Asylum Report shows the change of EUAA itself. The organization since January of this year as European agency has continuously widened its portfolio of services and tools and is currently conducting, as the executive director has already pointed out, operations in 11 member states and Moldova. After this presentation, you should know what you will find in this report and hopefully why it is worth consulting this compilation and make it a working tool for everybody who is concerned with asylum in Europe. Within the next approximately 25 minutes, I will try to make you familiar first with the function and the structure of the report. Then I will explain the coordination and drafting process, then elaborate on several key findings and end with a conclusion on EUAA itself. Coming to my first point, function and structure, the Asylum Report provides a comprehensive overview of key developments in asylum in member states of the European Union, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. The Common European Asylum System is covered by summarizing changes to legislation, policy, and practices at the European and national levels. The report presents selected case law which has shaped the interpretation of European and national laws, as well as key statistical indicators for the 2021 reference year. It highlights emerging trends and the effectiveness of asylum systems in including key developments in early 2022. Let me give you a quick overview of the report's structure. To set the scene, Section 1 presents an overview of forced displacement globally. It addresses the international community's response to large refugee movements. In 2021, the focus shifted from reactive measures during a global pandemic to adapting practices more permanently and capitalizing on gains made in digital innovations. The section zooms in on key topics which were discussed at the global level. Scaling up sustainable protection solutions, climate-induced displacement, the impact of gender on displacement, and developments for stateless populations. Section 2 focuses on the context in the European Union, presenting the latest legislative and policy developments in the evolution of the SIAS. It addresses key elements, key developments which spurred displacement in 2021 and early 2022, such as the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, the instrumentalization of migrants by the Belarusian government, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Cases addressed by the Court of Justice of the EU area are also summarized to clarify the interpretation of law in often complex situations. Transitioning from EASO to the European Union Agency for Asylum, EUAA, the agency was mandated with additional roles related to the operational and technical implementation of SIAS. Section 3 outlines the new tasks of the agency and presents an evaluation of its operational support in member states in the last year. Section 4, by far the longest part, with more than 200 pages, begins with supplementary overviews which summarizes the digitalization of the asylum procedure, the continued impact of COVID measures on asylum and reception systems, and national responses to the protection needs of Afghan citizens. The section analyzes developments at each stage of the asylum procedure, including procedures for first and second applications, special procedures, the Dublin procedure, reception conditions, detentions during the asylum procedure. It focuses on the access to the asylum procedure and to information provision, legal assistance, interpretation services, country of origin information, the content of protection, the return of former applicants, and resettlement. The key data indicators which are presented help to identify and monitor trends in countries receiving asylum applications and countries of origin. The situation of children and applicants with special needs is described in Section 5. The section combines quantitative, qualitative, and legal information to provide an overview of the situation for minors, women, victims of violence and human trafficking, and LGBTIQ applicants. It focuses in particular on accompanied minors, reviewing changes to legal representation, age assessments, and reception conditions. Annexes contain references, a reader's guide, and statistical tables. Please let me come now to the coordination and drafting process, because this answers the question, what is behind this report? And this is really far more than just compiling data and collecting them and then binding them and sending out a report. So what is behind this report? The report is coordinated and drafted in-house. This is a team effort with contributions from various sectors and areas of within EUAA's Asylum Knowledge Center and other parts of the organization. The team reaches out to several external stakeholders as well for their input and feedback to the report. This includes, for example, UNHCR, other EU JHA agencies and civil society organizations. The EUAA gathers primary information from national authorities. Drafts are elaborated based on information available in EUAA's Information and Documentation System, the IDS, which builds on a vast range of publicly available sources from national authorities and institutions. EU agencies and networks, international organizations, international, European and national courts, civil society organizations, and think tanks. Bilateral calls are held to verify, complete, and validate information available in IDS. The European Commission is consulted on specific sources to be featured in the report. Separate consultation process is established with UNHCR. Legislative instruments are referenced through the official legal gazette or official legal portal of each EU Plus country. Case law is collected and referenced through the EUAA case law database, which is accessible online. The report strives to include all major cases relevant to asylum and reception that were pronounced in the reference year. The team engages through various channels with civil society organizations, and this is, I think, really a very strong point for this report. Organizations are requested to provide their perspectives on legislative policy, practice, and jurisprudential developments. The input can cover practices of a specific EU Plus country or the EU as a whole. Research and academic institutions and think tanks also have the possibility to provide their input through open calls along with civil society organizations. The report uses media sources to inform readers about the multifaceted character of discussions on specific topics, sometimes very critical. As you see, the team effort to develop the compilation presented today is a very complex and inclusive process. Moreover, the way we collect, assess, collate, and evaluate information reflects EUAA's role as moderator, information hub, partner of national asylum administrations and various stakeholders, and general catalyst of the common European asylum system. Let me please come to a few key findings in a third step, and I would like to provide you with 9 very short key findings of the asylum report. First, the national asylum systems faced the COVID pandemic, digitalization and developments in Afghanistan as main challenges. Since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic in 2021, EU Plus countries employed a variety of methods to ensure access to protection and efficient processing of new and pending applications amidst public health measures which aimed to curb infection. A transition occurred in 2021 from reactive responses to the COVID pandemic toward an acknowledgement that COVID is an established reality, and the innovative working solutions introduced over the past 2 years are evolving into standard methodologies of practice in asylum. Access to COVID vaccinations and the rollout of national inoculation campaigns were fundamental in limiting the number of infections. The introduction of digital innovations in asylum and reception systems gained new momentum as EU Plus countries tried to ensure business continuity during COVID-related movement restrictions and social distancing. Digitalization expedited the delivery of services, offered more flexibility in cases where in-person interactions were not possible, and contributed to the modernization of working methods overall. While new technologies can be implemented rapidly, there was a continued need for strict scrutiny on the compatibility of digital innovations with fundamental rights and personal data protection guidelines. As a result of the security and human rights situation in Afghanistan, in 2021, EU Plus countries organized rapid evacuations and adapted the processing of applications submitted by Afghans. Efforts were also made to bring Afghan families together, while special arrangements were put in place for the provision of material reception conditions and the integration of Afghan evacuees. The high number of pending cases by Afghan applicants, as well as the status of those who do not qualify for protection but cannot be returned, were issues that remained to be tackled. Secondly, EU Plus countries adapted procedures to manage arrivals as applications for international protection increased by 1/3. The EU's external borders experienced increased pressure in 2021, with arrivals rising over pre-pandemic levels. In total, EU Plus countries received approximately 648,000 applicants for international protection, representing an increase by 1/3 compared to 2020 and matching the level of 2018. Two monthly peaks in September and November were largely the result of more applications by Syrians and Afghans, who were the two largest applicant groups throughout the year, with 117 and 102,000 applications respectively. These two citizenships were followed at a distance by nationals of Iraq, 30,000, Pakistan and Turkey, 25,000 each, and Bangladesh with 20,000 applications. Germany received by far the most asylum applications. It was 191,000, followed by France, 121, Spain 65, Italy 53, and Austria 39,000 applications. EU Plus countries responded to the increased arrivals by adopting processes to facilitate the making, registering, and lodging of applications. Several countries reorganized first instance procedures, while other countries continued with initial or arrival centers where asylum and reception authorities work together for better coordination. Thirdly, protection needs remain high, with new hotspots of displacement adding to already existing pressure. The Taliban surge to power in Afghanistan created new waves of outward mobility, while people continue to flee existing flashpoints of conflict and unrest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Myanmar, South Sudan, Syria, the Sahel region, Venezuela, and Yemen. In early 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine led to a crisis in Europe and pushed millions of people to seek refuge in neighboring countries. Public debate in 2021 centered around key topics in asylum, including, for example, the need to shift from humanitarian emergency responses to the provision of sustainable, durable protection solutions, the link between international protection and climate-induced displacement, with climate change affecting millions of people, a better understanding of gender-related persecution, and to mainstreaming the gender dimension in the provision of protection solutions, and the experience of stateless persons in the context of displacement and the provision or lack of protection solutions. Fourthly, EU Plus countries implemented measures to alleviate pressure on saturated reception systems due to the rising number of arrivals. National efforts focused on the reorganization of reception systems to accommodate changing migratory flows and increase the availability of services. New accommodation spaces were opened, often of temporary nature. The number of places for unaccompanied minors and applicants with special needs increased, and beneficiaries of protection received assistance to transition faster from reception structures to private housing. In 2021, collaboration between central and local authorities increased to address together some of the challenges related to the reception of applicants for international protection. However, the number of arrivals brought the reception systems to their limits. The capacities in some member states are saturated with a combination of high inflow, low outflow due to low numbers of returns, Dublin transfers, and shortages in the housing market, not allowing for beneficiaries to leave. Sometimes new capacity cannot easily be created due to resistance from local authorities. Some member states are seriously struggling. Solutions are not always found easily. Fifthly, implicit withdrawals pointed to a pattern of secondary movements of applicants from countries along the Balkan routes and at the EU's external borders. About 69,000 applications were withdrawn in 2021, with 2/3 of all withdrawn applications being implicit, meaning that the applicant had absconded and abandoned the procedure. Implicit withdrawals can serve as a proxy indicator of the beginning of secondary movements towards another EU plus country where the applicant submits a new asylum application. Consistent with this interpretation, figures in 2021 indicate a pattern of secondary movements from countries along the Balkan routes and at the EU's external borders, confronting already saturated reception and asylum systems with additional burdens. 6. Growing jurisprudence implies increases in secondary movements of beneficiaries and the need for structural solutions. While a lack of comprehensive data makes it difficult to fully understand the scope of secondary movements, growing jurisprudence suggests that the phenomenon is becoming more prominent. The European Commission has included proposals under the Pact on Migration and Asylum to address secondary movements, for example, by allowing transfers of recognized beneficiaries under the proposed Asylum and Migration Management Regulation and better tracking of this type of movement under the amending proposal to revise the Eurodac regulation. And we are working very hard on going deeper into this phenomenon and providing situational awareness. While practical barriers persisted in certain aspects of everyday life for beneficiaries of international protection, so this is point 6. And then I'll go to the systematic, orchestrated, and synergistic strategies are needed for the effective integration of beneficiaries. 2021 marked the first year of implementation of the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion 2021 to 2027, with several EU plus countries updating their integration strategies to match the EU Action Plan. Systematic integration strategies can equip beneficiaries of international protection with the necessary skills to thrive in their new society and continue developing personally and socially. To better understand the effectiveness of current practices and identified areas of improvement, an increasing number of studies were conducted by various stakeholders to evaluate integration activities. While practical barriers persisted in certain aspects of everyday life for beneficiaries of international protection, national authorities working together with local authorities and civil society organizations undertook initiatives to overcome these challenges, especially in the field of children's education. 8 EU plus countries increased the accessibility of information on asylum. National authorities worked throughout 2021 on mobile applications, online portals, information hubs, updated websites, and new features on existing information platforms to enable applicants to access information faster and more easily. The information provided through these platforms was made available in multiple languages. Many national authorities also created targeted information for specific groups in need of protection, for example, evacuees from Afghanistan and displaced persons from Ukraine. And with regard to Ukraine, this war has really changed the information environment of the member states and of the EUAA as well. Last but not least, protection needs are generated in crises. Functional asylum systems need to be crisis responsive. Developments in 2021 and early 2022 illustrated the paramount importance of having a functional, multinational European protection architecture in place, a system that provides effective protection to those in need while returning those not in need in a respectful and dignified manner. These developments are highlighted a core premise at the heart of asylum. The need for protection is generated and amplified by crises. Therefore, crises and associated pressures are not to be viewed as exceptional, but as the reality that a functional asylum system is designed to address. Over the past 2 decades, with the establishment and evolution of SIAS, Europe has made remarkable progress toward developing a common framework for managing asylum. As discussions continue on the legislative instruments of the European Commission's Pact on Migration and Asylum, SIAS will need to be further calibrated and modernized to respond to evolving migratory patterns and associated protection needs. Ukraine has shown that there is still a long way to go in adopting the structural changes needed for SIAS to get fully functional and more resilient, balancing responsibility with solidarity with the next crisis, when the next crisis will hit Europe. So please let me come to a brief conclusion. I have, in the last minutes, tried to make you familiar with the function and structure of the asylum report, to explain the coordination and drafting process, and to present a few key findings. The report and the depicted process of collecting, processing information, the networks in place, and the dialogue with various stakeholders mirror EUAA's changing role. With an enhanced mandate, the EUAA can support the implementation of SIAS more actively. Like the refugee crisis in 2015 and 16, the war in Ukraine has had a deep impact on the organization and has led to a process of change, the end of which is not in sight. The agency has to prove in this crisis that it is ready to offer greater operational and technical support to increase the efficiency of asylum systems, and we are doing this now in 11 member states plus Moldova. EUAA improves and accelerates the provision of assistance at the request of member states. It further develops operational standards, indicators, and practical guidelines to inform uniform, high-quality decision-making in asylum cases and ensure higher levels of convergence. The agency makes every effort to better monitor and report on the functioning of national asylum and reception systems. It contributes to capacity building in non-EU countries and supports EU plus countries with resettlement schemes. A key area of the work program of the EUAA comprises the provision of operational and technical assistance to the member states, experiencing disproportionate pressure on their asylum and reception systems. EUAA's operational plans cover a range of actions which are tailored to the specific context and needs of each country. One central contribution to SIAS, member states and other stakeholders, is situational awareness, operational intelligence, and in addition to collecting data from the member states, merging it with all possible sources of information and embedding own info sensors into EUAA operations, which we are doing right now. And in this regard as well, Ukraine has been kind of a watershed. An external evaluation of the agency's operational support in 2021 concluded that this support was highly relevant to the needs of member states and flexible to adapt to rapidly changing contexts. Ladies and gentlemen, the EUAA is in transition, and transition is a permanent process which is adopting the agency to the changing needs and environment. We walk this path with humility and with a great respect for the work of our diverse partners. We are on an everyday basis working with and have an exchange with. The war in Ukraine shows that we all share a common mission, and this is to care for people fleeing war and hardship and seeking refuge in Europe. And this joint effort is reflected in these 400 pages of the asylum report. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm glad to have with me Judith Tanzos and Friedrich Pöschel from the Situational Awareness Unit, and both are very familiar with the report itself and its drafting and, of course, with its finding. And we will be glad to have your questions now. But before we start the questions and answers, this coming as a big, big surprise, I would like to officially hand over on behalf of the two teams, of Yaga's team and Anthony's team, the Asylum Report 2022, one of the two existing hard copies of this report. I want to present this officially to you.
Thank you very much, Bernhard. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it's launched. We have it. Thanks for the also for the presentation. No, leave it. I will not give it back.
Okay. Well, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Bernhard, and of course, Mr. Gori, for your speech and for your presentation. Both in the case of Mr. Gori's speech, providing the context in which we're working in, the geopolitical context, where we stand overall in terms of the CAS, and of course, Bernhard explaining the report, the drafting process, which is, as he explained very well, very intense, very lengthy. Lots of civil society organizations consulted as well, and the two colleagues, Friedrich and Judith, representing the two teams who have spent many months, I would say, consulting and drafting and working on it. And yes, we only have two hard copies, which is deliberate, of course. But at this point, I would just mention, because I forgot to at the beginning, I'd mention that you can find the report on our website. You have, those of you who are in the room, you have links in the little brochures you have on your chairs. You can find the links on our social media. And also on our homepage, you will find quite easily where to go to. So you can find the report itself and all the associated materials which are also published with it. And so now we are just 5 minutes behind schedule, so that's great. So we have 25 minutes for our first Q&A session before we have a short break for coffee. And so what I'll do is maybe we can start, once again, I'll just repeat, if you're in the room, you can just raise your hand and I'll point you out, and the microphone is in your armrest. And if you're online, please send your question on the chat. I also see some questions about personal requests for asylum, which is not something we'll be addressing at this session, something you can write to us separately. Maybe I'll start with the room. Are there any questions from the audience here? Right now, I don't see any. I see a question. I mean, the question is actually it's actually a private case question, but it relates to an individual in a specific member state, which I won't mention. But it's about long delays, so delays in waiting for asylum processes and decisions to be taken. So maybe that's something we can address. The time it takes for decisions to be taken, for interviews to be given, and decisions, and maybe we can address, this issue. I don't know if Ms. Grigori wants to.
I can start. Yes, thank you very much, Anis. And thanks for the question, of course. It's always the first icebreaker who is, in fact, the one which is important. But I'm happy to address this. Of course, EUAA and before EASO is following very closely the developments when it comes to the asylum procedures as such. Also, of course, the duration of the asylum procedures, which it's highly relevant. You have, of course, a legal frame in European Union that member states in a way would need to adhere to. But those, let's say, the deadlines for the asylum procedures, of course, they really vary from country to country. And I need to also mention that we have in most of the cases, so majority of cases, asylum procedures that, of course, don't end on the first instance. We also have the appeal procedure, which is highly relevant, and then we have the procedures on the second instance. I can imagine that, of course, Jude will go into more of the details of the duration through the member states, but what I want to address is that, of course, our aim, or the aim of the asylum agency, is that with reinforced support, especially operational support, and also permanent support to our member states, we want to help them to, of course, decrease the duration of the procedure. We believe very strongly that fast and efficient procedures in Europe, when we talk about the asylum, of course, are highly relevant. People should not wait more than, let's say, 6 months. They should not wait more than the let's say, normal duration in a particular country would be accepted. And I think that, of course, with that, we really try to help member states very concretely. So almost in all our operational plans that we have signed with member states, there is a measure on the asylum. And of course, we try to focus first on the backlog, meaning that we try to reduce the time of waiting with, of course, with extensive support. We were very successful in Greece with our Greek partners. We also have been very successful in Italy. So there are many good, let's say, examples and practices where EUAA has helped a lot on the ground with, of course, decreasing of the asylum procedure on first level. On the second level, we do also have measures to help and support the courts and tribunals which are dealing with cases on the second level. And even there, of course, the ultimate goal and aim is to really shorten the asylum procedures. But if we go more in details and numbers, of course, I will give the floor to my colleagues.
Would you like to?
Yes, if I may, there's actually some good news there, because if you look at all instances together, you had 767,000 cases pending at the end of last year. So that is cases that are still awaiting a final decision. And that is actually pretty much the same as the year before, even though there were so many new applications coming in during 2021. How can that be? Well, the solution is the cases pending at first instance went up, as you would expect when there's new cases coming in, because they have to be processed and so on. But those at the second or higher instances, they went down. So that's actually a rather good development, I would say.
And then maybe coming in with what you can find in relation to this topic within the report. Of course, this is something which is present throughout almost all the chapters of the report, but you're lucky because there is a specific chapter or section 4.4.11 on the length of the asylum procedures. Just to take a step back, what you Of course, you can remember that with the Asylum Procedure Directive, there is only, the articles are not binding, so there is only a suggestion that the asylum procedure should be concluded within 6 months, and there are, of course, all the other possibilities to make the procedure a little bit longer. And this has, so there is actually no binding rule under EU legislation on this. What we could see that indeed with the increase in applications, member states had undertook several steps already at the first step, so already at the access to procedure. Bernard already mentioned a few of these steps. So making sure that they already get the first steps right, they have all the information with registration, with identification, to make sure that then later on the asylum procedure can be easier and it can go a little bit faster as well. As I mentioned, under the specific section, you can find all the steps that asylum authorities have undertook to make sure that the asylum procedure can go as fast as possible after these first steps. And what you could also see, we have mentioned, for example, digitalization. Digitalization procedures have been going on through the different stakeholders, indeed with the idea to make sure that the information gathered in the beginning can reach the competent authority in a quicker manner, so that the decision can be taken also in a quicker manner. If you would like to see all the different steps that authorities have been undertaken with this objective, you can go online and check one of the asylum reports related product, the National Asylum Developments Database, where very easily you can just click on a theme and you will have all the steps that have been undertaken in one click. Something important as well, we have mentioned courts. Of course, courts have been very vocal about the length of the procedure. So when the cases have been dragging on for a longer time, the report also mentioned these cases and what were the kind of the steps and the standards that courts have at national or at European level defined as to the length of the procedure. Other than the report, you can also find these cases as mentioned in the EUAA case law database as well.
Thank you. And actually now we have quite a few questions coming in, so I'd also ask the colleagues to keep as short as possible, while of course answering the questions so that we can get through as many as possible. One question which we have here, and if anybody else has a question, please just raise your hand, was a question I saw earlier on our cooperation with Frontex on the eastern border, let's say. I presume referring to the Ukraine situation. The question, which I can't find now, but was about how we cooperate with Frontex in our operations.
Yeah, I'll start to address this question. Of course, indeed, we are, so the Asylum Agency is a part of the group of agencies, the centralized agencies on the level of EU, which we call the Family of Justice and Home Affairs Agency. And of course, Frontex is a very important agency in this cluster. We have a very important working arrangement with Frontex, and of course, we're implementing that. When it comes to the work on the ground, I need to say that it was very relevant, so the cooperation back in 2015 and 16, we worked for the first time really hand in hand in so-called hotspots when they have been created in Italy and in Greece to address the situation at that time. If we take a look at now from, let's say, the perspective of Ukraine crisis, Frontex is focusing, yes, on with his work directly on the border. We're not present at the border. I mean, when we implement and help, of course, implementing the temporary protection directive in the countries where we operate, We do exchange information with Frontex, of course. We try to, in a way, address the workflow with them, but we are not working together on the border on the borders operationally. So the implementation with our operating plans, namely in Romania, and also in Czech Republic, focuses more on the info provisions, as Judith mentions, and on registration, on the dissemination of information, so the access to procedure, which is, of course, within our mandate, and Frontex, of course, is focusing on other issues.
Perhaps if you allow a very short addition to that, we have a very close cooperation with Frontex on the level of data exchange, yes, and we are in several working groups cooperating, and so the aim is, of course, to have a common situational picture of what's going on, which is a challenge. And also in that regard, Ukraine has changed our environment and our procedures and the way we cooperate with others, which is always an issue, what to share and what not to share, and what to publish and not to publish. And so Frontex is an example that it has become even closer than it was before the Ukraine crisis started.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll pass on to another question we have. And this refers to something you mentioned in your presentation, Bernard. You mentioned there was some reluctance on the part of local authorities with the issue of housing and integration. What would you say is the main reason for that, that you saw in your investigation or research?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it cannot be answered in a general way, because the national systems are so very much different from each other. And if you take, for example, the German federalism with long ways and many states who are very, very mighty and keen on keeping control on everything. But one thing is, I think, simply capacity questions, and then the question of political control of what's going on sometimes. So to put it very brief, these are two of the main reasons why this is sometimes really difficult. And already to have reliable information on the capacities on the state level is really a challenge sometimes. And as I said, it cannot be answered in a general way, but it's very different for each and every member state. I don't know if you want to add.
Maybe, just to complement here, of course, the integration, housing, and the implementation of the rights, of course, when it comes to refugees or the asylum seekers, are not in our domain. That's not our mandate, but we do collect data, as Bernard mentioned. What I would want to point out here, and I think it's highly relevant also for then further debates on the international protection in Europe, is that with the implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive, we've seen that, of course, our partners in the member states have changed completely. Because in the majority of member states, the implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive is not in the hands of the asylum authorities, but it's in the hands of other entities. And here also, we needed to adjust, of course. We needed to develop new, let's say, coordinations, new cooperation with the entities that, of course, have not been maybe such close partners to our agency. And I think this will continue. And I think this is something that, of course, we also need to internally address to really reach out to the right actors and to get a proper feedback from them. But Judith, you wanted to?
Maybe in the report what you can see as well, and this has been a tendency that we have seen also in past reports, that there has been, of course, an increasing opening to from the level of national authorities, from reception authorities, more towards the local level, because there has been, of course, a realization that, that when they need to increase capacity, they need to work together with local authorities, otherwise it will not work out. So within the report, you find a lot of these initiatives. How do reception authorities try to make sure that they have a better cooperation, a better dialogue with local authorities and also with other stakeholders as well? In terms of opening reception centers, but also then in making sure in certain countries, for example in Belgium or in the Netherlands, that there is also an outflow from the reception centers. So how this cooperation goes on, and you can find lots of examples within the report how these improvement procedures are trying to be implemented.
Thank you. So we have lots of questions coming in, and we're actually running out of time. But let's take. I want to take at least 3 more if we can squeeze them in, and we have one from the audience here. So please, the microphone is in your armrest. You have to lift it up, and then I'll take some more, and we have another colleague here as well. So we'll try to take 3 or 4 more. And while the colleague finds the microphone, I'll just say there's some questions on temporary protection and Ukraine, which I think we'll leave for the next session, because that's going to be discussing this kind of issue. You have to press the speak button on.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. I have actually 2 questions. One is about asylum seekers. You kind of mentioned it just now, about we see with the Ukrainian wars that EU responded very quick and smooth when Ukrainians start arriving into EU. So it doesn't mean that EU countries are not able to do this response. They are able. Why this does not apply to other asylum seekers and migrants crossing the border? Why is the responses taking so long to process the asylum cases and give them housing or make them wait for years and years to respond, while this can be done very quickly? We can see it in the past few months. And the second one is about digitalization. We spoke a lot about digitalization, and this is mainly in regards to asylum seekers applying to online for making application. What about those who cannot access, or they are digital illiterate, especially women and girls or unaccompanied minors, let's say? Some of these women maybe never been to school before. They don't know how to access it. They cannot read or write. And also women who are maybe under a lot of pressure, at high risk from their partners, from their male partners. And some of the women who are actually being smuggled into EU, and the person who's smuggling them or trafficking them are with them, and they're not able to express themselves so much via digital application than they do with people. I mean, I just want to know what are the processes, what do you have in place for them? Thank you.
So we're talking about access to digital processes by, let's say, vulnerable people, and also, I suppose, the difference between TPD and asylum, effectively, the first question.
Maybe I can address the first question first, and I think we will come back to in the second panel to this question. But just to be really brief, of course, you know that the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive, which has been adopted back in 2001, basically has been done now for the first time in the history of European Union. I mean, it's a special legal instrument that has been built back in the days for addressing the unprecedented flows of migrants, and we're seeing people fleeing in millions, of course, to European Union. It's a special, as I said, legal frame, which in fact allows the eligibility assessment prima facie, meaning that you go, I mean, so the authorities, they don't go into the deep merits of the claim, because it's obvious that this activation took place due to the war and, of course, unprecedented influx. So it's the structure of the legal system that we have, and of course, asylum seekers coming from other parts of Europe, as we said, we try to, in a way, help member states to assure fast and efficient asylum procedures, but of course they are taking under the different legal frame of the common European asylum system. But as said, we'll come to the discussion for sure in the next panel. With digitalization and the cases here, I will leave the floor to my colleagues.
Perhaps a brief answer to this. First, I mean, this is something that you experience everywhere you are. You have in Europe problems if you are illiterate and if you have no smartphone and if you are not oriented. So this is simply the same everywhere. What I can say is that the member states, assisted by the agency, they have really made tremendous efforts to take care of vulnerable people, to have social workers on the ground who explain the system, who are receiving people. A special care is we have people who deal with illiterate people. So this is really, I cannot elaborate on that, but if you go to single member states, there has been tremendous effort to especially take care of these vulnerable groups. And yeah, so.
So maybe just to conclude it, for the first question, what I think, and you can also find it in the concluding remarks of the report, is that what is the most important is that there has been, and it was also already mentioned, there has been a tremendous development over the past 20 years, and what is the major advantage of the SAS is there is a stable legal framework in place to address these kinds of situations as well. So it might not be perfect, and we can see that the Commission is working on the proposals to make the system work better. But there is this legal framework which gives us a very good and solid basis to address situations of crisis. On digitalization, again, this is a very, very interesting question, and it also goes through the report that one of the, so we can see basically two trends. One of the trends is digitalization effort, but the other one is indeed that member states and national authorities realized that it does not work for everyone. So within the report, and especially under Section 5, you can find a lot of these examples of how they try to address the vulnerabilities and how they try to address that even those who are illiterate or digitally illiterate can also have an effective access to the procedure, how they, what are the different developments to make sure that they understand what is going on with them and that they are accompanied through the process. So I would advise to have a look there.
Thank you. So we'll try to, we're running a bit short on time, but we have one question from the audience, and then I'll try to combine two questions which I have in writing into one, and then we'll see where we are with the time.
Thank you, and good morning to you all. It is great to see the new team of the situational awareness. Proud of you for this report. It will be an interesting to read, although very long. My question would be connected to one of your elements in the presentation earlier, where you say that the SEATs needs to be further calibrated and modernized. I mean, crisis responsive, that is very clear. It has been a challenging year, as the executive director has mentioned. My question to you would be, will we find in this report also best practices and components that we can actually get inspired for further planning or working with the authorities, building from the knowledge that you have seen along this year that you have looked at? Thank you.
Very shortly, of course, you can find also best practices and something that you can build on. So what is, as you know, the report for its 11th edition as well, the report has to be comprehensive and balanced, building on this year more than 1,500 sources. So it means that, of course, most of the questions and what we're talking about now might come from challenges, but we really take pride on also including all the positive developments that, or the different practices that seem to work out for national authorities, which can be inspiring for others as well. Be it only an initiative for national authority, or maybe also working together with other stakeholders. And you mentioned that the report might be very long to read, so I'm really happy to say that we have tailored outputs for this. So we know that all of you are busy people, so if you would like to, if you don't have the time to read all the report from A to Z, of course you can go to the online version and just check the heading or the section that you would like to. So that's one possibility. The other possibility, I mentioned already some of the related outputs, the EUAA caseload database or the National Asylum Developments database, which again, just in one click, you will have the results that you might be looking for. We have very, very nice infographics within the report, but also separately. And I think I'm missing something. Oh yes, of course. If you would like to read some more, we also have the sources specifically grouped. So if you would like to look into one specific topic, you can also use this product, the Sources on Asylum. Yes, and of course the most important that we have developed last year. We piloted the fact sheets, the thematic fact sheets. So if you're interested in a topic, in a specific topic, you can find already for last year's report, for example, an age assessment or a reception of unaccompanied minors, thematic fact sheets, which in a very, very concise manner bring together horizontally everything that is in the report on a specific topic. And we already, for this year's report, we have already launched 3 of these fact sheets. So one of them is on recognition rates, one of them is on age assessment, and one of them is on reception of unaccompanied minors. And stay tuned because there is more to come.
And one sentence, if you look at our reporting in general, then you will hopefully notice that we are moving more and more from just collecting data, analyzing data, into the direction really to give recommendations and to make assessments and to say what has to be expected and what should be done. And we are very closely analyzing who is reading these reports and who is the target groups. In that regard, we are cooperating with other agencies and have a kind of course, different roles. But this is something which Ukraine has fostered very much, this process.
Anis, I'm happy for this question, and thank you very much indeed, Janka, because I think that with the answers that Judith and Bernard have shared with you, it's also the, one core question that I'm always faced as the executive director of the asylum agency, and that question is why asylum system in Europe doesn't work. I think that's the evidence, totally opposite proof that it does. It's very complex. It's highly complex, the only multinational system in the world, but it does work. We need to improve it. That's also, it has its challenges, true, but it does work. So, read it and you'll see, right, Judith?
Very, very pertinent summation of everything. Okay, so I'm going to combine 2 written questions, but just remember that we do have another question and answer session after the panel discussion. So some of these questions might also be pertinent to that. So we're not ignoring them as much as possible. Okay, so these are 2 separate questions, but a bit associated, and they're actually relate to our new mandate. So I think this is also something we can answer. The first one is, you also said that as of next year, the EUAA will monitor the application of the asylum acquis. How is this going to happen, and what measures will it be able to take in case of non-compliance? So that's the first one. And also, in the new pact and with the screening regulation, would the EUAA be working at borders in future screening centers? How is the EUAA preparing itself for it at the present time? So, Nina, yes. I think this is something maybe...
Yes, sure. Yeah, briefly on monitoring. Indeed, it is a part of the new regulation, the implementation as such. So the implementation foreseen from the side of the Commission in a way has not materialized at the end in the final results of the, let's say, agreement with the co-legislators, so namely the European Parliament and the Council, when in fact, so this part of the regulation will be implemented only partially, so meaning that from the 1st of January 2024, we will be able to monitor the implementation of common European asylum system in member states. So for now, currently, we are in the process of preparing the methodology for this together with our management board. And the implementation then of the monitoring in a way, is going to be conducted together with member states in member states. But then the final results of the monitoring is going to be basically a draft of report that is going to be shared with that particular member state and with the management board. But the effect, I would say, the effect of the monitoring will not still be implemented, or basically, in a way, this part of the regulation has been frozen until the decision on PACT or the adoption of the migration and asylum regulation is finalized. So, of course, the reports of the monitoring is going to be highly significant also for our agency, because then together with this particular member state, we will be able to, in a way, get in a dialogue of if there is potential support that this particular member state would need from us, or how to address potential shortcomings that will come out of the monitoring. Of course, we will be, in a way, trying to address those together, of course, with the member states as partners. But of course, everything, when it comes to, let's say, dysfunctional systems or not implementing the legislation, it's always in the hands of European Commission. Of course, they are the guidings of the treaty, and they potentially will be able to also use this report of the monitoring and see if there is a need to address this further on. When it comes to the screening, indeed, we are happy that we've seen the progress in the Council during the French presidency. Of course, we congratulate the French presidency on that. Yes, it's true that potentially the implementation of the screening will, in a way, add to our mandate, or will have a better definition of what the agency will be able to do when addressing the needs of certain member states in this particular screening procedure. So if we take a look at the screening regulation as such and our mandate, I think is going to be possible combination of both, because if certain member states who will need to conduct the screening at the border will need our help and support, according to our regulation, they will be able to ask us to do that. And of course, then we will be able to also respond and help them within the screening procedures. But we will see how the end text, of course, will going to be, because there are still the trialogues with the Parliament, and we are waiting of that too. And then we'll be able to better define the potential role of EUAA if asked to do that also.
So certainly new challenges ahead as we keep growing and our
Sure.
mandate keeps expanding.
Sure.
Okay, so of course there are still a lot of questions, and you know, I feel bad ignoring any of them. But again, just to repeat, we do have another quick Q&A session after the next panel event, which I believe will be very interesting. Let's say, because we have representatives from all the three EU institutions, Council, Parliament, and the European Commission, joining Ms. Grigori on the stage. And it will be based on 3 pre-prepared questions, which will be up on the screen, and we will ask to them. And we hopefully have an interesting discussion, not only focusing on what's happening with Ukraine, because I think that's most the event or the development that is most in people's heads right now, but also more broadly on the state of the CAS. And then we'll have a Q&A session after that, where even some of the questions I see might also be interesting to hear from the panels. So without further ado, we're running about 10 minutes late. So I would say we start at 10 past 11, if I'm getting my time right, yes. So we'll take half an hour. And we're having coffee outside in the lobby for those of you who are here with us. And for those of you at home, please enjoy your coffee at home. And please do join us again at 10 past 11, because we're going to have a very interesting discussion after this. See you soon. So, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to get settled here and we'll start in 2 minutes, okay? You can sit where you were. This I don't need for now. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a refreshing coffee break. And I also welcome back to those who are joining us online again. I checked before and we have several hundred people joining us, which is great. And we also saw that reflected in the questions and answers session we had at the first session. And I hope to see lots of questions also at the end of this session. And on that note, I'm very, very, very happy to welcome representatives of all the EU institutions, as well as, of course, our agency. And so I'll introduce them. Joining Mr. Grigori on the stage, who we've already met and been introduced, we have Ms. Elena Ioncheva, who is a member of the European Parliament on the LIBE Committee, so very, of course, relevant to us, and thank you very much for joining us. We have Ms. Gailine Sanjo, who's a counselor in charge of asylum at the French Permanent Representation. And of course, as you know, we're in the closing days of the French presidency, so I'm sure you're also looking forward to ending a very busy period, a very successful period, I must say as well. And of course, Mr. Michael Schotter, who's not new to us here, member of our management board as well, and Director for Migration and Asylum at DG Home at the European Commission. And how it's going to work today, so thank you all for being here. How it's going to work today is we have 3 questions which have been prepared and which have been shared with the panelists already. So what I'll do is I will read out the first question, and I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to give their reaction, their thoughts, their feedback on the question. And of course, I encourage also then some reactions to each other if you feel it's opportune. And then we'll do this 3 times with each of the 3 questions. We have until, let me just check, until 11:40. We have, well, okay, we're already at 15:15. We have about half an hour to 40 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A session where we also have some questions from the first session, which might apply to this discussion as well. And we'll also welcome additional questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass to the first question, which should appear on the screen in a second. There you go. So the first question is, over 7 million people have fled Ukraine since February, most to the EU. In fact, it's about 6 million as it stands. Has Europe risen to the challenge of this tragedy? Could it have done better? And what is expected from the EUAA? And so maybe we'll start from left to right on this occasion, and then we'll do it a different way in the next one. So, Ms. Ioncheva, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor and for this possibility to be together and to share some thoughts. The war in Ukraine, yes, led to millions of displaced people. I just want to say that for 1 week, Europe accepted more people than for the whole crisis in 2015. We received more than 1.5 million people to the European Union. And really the war in Ukraine and the crisis, it's completely unprecedented. We can't compare with anything that was happening in Europe for the last decades. So if you need to analyze the crisis for the last 10 years, we can see that people coming to Europe are using different routes. They are using different, this happened during different amount of time, different numbers of refugees were coming, but we can't rely on ad hoc solutions. That's why it's very important that our asylum system is reformed. Did you manage to cope with the Ukrainian crisis? I think yes, the member states opened their borders. The member states managed to reorganize their systems. So I think it was really a very good example how quickly the European Union can react in such crisis. But the question is, could we do this better? Did you use all the instruments that European Union has in order to cope better with this situation? Well, I think somehow we need to rethink what kind of reception facilities we need in the future, what kind of planning we need in such situations. Also, we need to think about the cooperation with the neighboring third countries. And also, it's very important the time. We need to be very quick in order to put all this system to work in a better way. And I just want to remember what happened, very personal, what happened 1 year ago when we celebrate 10 years of the EASO. And yes, EASO had a lot of instruments to cope with that kind of situation, very good analysis. EASO was able to help to some member states that asking help, but now you can see that EASO is working as a fully fledged agency, and we are really lucky to have this agency working now, because we are able to help to all the member states that were asking help with the Ukrainian crisis. So I'd like to thank you, Nina, for all the efforts that you have been putting, and to thank all the staff. And thank you for this.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sanjo.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. First of all, I wanted to apologize for Pierre's, my boss, Pierre Lamotte, which is taken in a trilogue at the European Parliament this morning, and therefore couldn't be part of this panel representation. But meanwhile, I'm very happy to be here, and it's nice to see all my colleagues with whom I've been working these recent days, so that we could perhaps try to achieve something for the reform of the CAS mentioned by Mrs. Yancheva. The first question was, has we risen to the challenge of the tragedy of the Ukrainian war? From a personal point of view, and it's not just a personal point of view, recalling where we were at the very beginning of our presidency and what we achieved to do at this end of the presidency, I think we have taken a collective momentum of what we're right. The crisis of the war in Ukraine created a shock in the public opinion, not really only the public opinion. Most of the member states had to coordinate to organize themselves in a very quick manner, and therefore we managed to have something that has never been made before, to activate within just 1 week for the Temporary Protection Directive. And these Temporary Protection Directives led to some other steps that we had to take in common regarding how we could be welcoming the refugees coming from Ukraine. An important point, I think, on this side is we have to thank the member states that were at the borders of Ukraine. Notably, we spoke about Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Romania. We welcomed so much of the refugees, even before the Council or the member states could be able to coordinate, and despite the fact that we made this thing very, very quickly. We activated at the Council the IPCR mechanism, which was functioning, but for which we made there were regular meetings of the IPCR to coordinate the action of the member states and to see how we could be welcoming the persons, even by organizing the transfers of the person, organizing the way they will be crossing the borders with limited time period, not to wait too much at the borders. And in the same vein, I think we have another special thanks to give to the EASO and to the Frontex and to the EU agencies and to the international organizations that helped us to identify the people, to organize the transfers, to organize the transports, and to organize how they would be welcomed in the different member states. So on that specific point, I think we have taken the measure of the tragedy. We have done what should and could have been done in that way. Could it have done better? For sure, it could have been better, but I think we don't have to be ashamed of what we did in such a short time limit, knowing that we came up to 8.5 million of persons that were being displaced and that have been completely welcomed in the different member states. So for sure, we still have to work on some aspects to improve the welcoming of the refugees, but we've done a lot, and we still have to continue on that way.
Thank you very much. Ms. Grigori, please.
Thank you very much, Anis. I will take up 3 points from the previous speakers and also mention something which, of course, it's in connection and relevant for our agency. As I've said in the previous panel, of course, you know that European Asylum Support Office that has been created 10 years ago as together with the partners, of course, meaning the member states, but also all the other stakeholders, developed certain tools that we are using now, all the member states, all the actors in our common European asylum system. We've built that, of course, as I said, in a truthful and really excellent collaboration with the actors. And then, in a way, we've struck so hard. I mean, we were ready to go a step forward. So I'm happy, and I also need to thank Madam Joncheva, because she was the rapporteur for the regulation of EUAA to be adopted, of course, in the conciliation procedure, so with Parliament and the Council. And we thought, okay, 2022 is going to be the year of transition. So we will transit from EASO and we will become fully fledged agency at the end of 2022. And we will be able to support even better. And then, of course, in February, Ukraine happened. And of course, we needed to react fastly as a new agency. So we're still in the process of, let's say, transiting. But of course, I'm really happy that although this unprecedented situation that was mentioned happened and people, so many millions, fled to European Union, we were really able, together with the help of Commission, of course, for assuring us additional resources, to, in a way, react fastly and efficiently. So coming from operating plans that have been established with 5 Mediterranean countries, and we were working there already, so in Greece, Italy, Spain, in Malta, and Cyprus. Then with the Belarus crisis, we're present in Lithuania and Latvia. And then also we've signed an operating plan with Belgium. But then, of course, with Ukraine, we expanded to Romania to help them with temporary protection implementation with Czech Republic. And we've signed also operating plan with the Netherlands. So basically this fast reaction, which in fact has been also a reaction of the system, our own system, of the agency sustainability. I think I've proven that, of course, already as EASO we were quite ready, but with the new, let's say, regulation, of course, we in the future can do much more. And I think that's the first point that I want to mention. Second point is the question of fast reaction on could this be done better. To tell you the truth, I think that we did it as Europe, we did it really, really well. Of course, under the lead of French presidency, Commission first, of course, proposed the temporary protection activation, the directive, and then in the Council something unprecedented happened because there was unanimity among the member states to support that. So to support the implementation of that, which hasn't happened for a long, long time. In Council, on the political level, and we talk about migration and asylum, unanimity is not really, let's say, a case. It's more or less a huge achievement. So I think that is something that has been also unprecedented. And I think that this also helped with, of course, this fast reaction. And then the people, receiving people, of course, that's something that it's highly relevant. But that, I think, is going to be the main question for the sustainability or the, let's say, implementation of this and the rights of the people that's there. And last but not least, the TPD brought new actors in the bigger picture. Asylum agency has always worked together and hand in hand. Our stakeholders always asylum and reception authorities. But now TPD is implemented in the countries so in the member states with totally different actors. So if we take a look at some of the examples, of course, in France, this is in the domain of Prefectura. In Germany, in the domain of Ländern. In Italy, registration is done by Questure, so police. So also for us, that's a huge challenge. We're facing new partners, new dynamics, and also we needed to create tools to address that. We could not use the asylum tools. We could use our knowledge, but not the tools as such. So I think that those will be the challenges also for the future.
Mr. Schutter.
Okay, well, a lot has been said already, but just to say, I think from our perspective, I think Europe did rise to the challenge. Unprecedented, as mentioned already, in terms of the scale of this, the displacement, the numbers involved. And I think from our end, the European end, we did what was necessary. But I don't want to sort of say that it was only a European action. Of course, this was also unprecedented in the way that it was a collective effort from the point of view of also the societies involved, and it couldn't have been done, I think, without that. I think we have to acknowledge that the way that the societies, in particular in the member states most impacted, themselves responded from the heart. I mean, it transformed the way reception has been carried out, where, quite frankly, obviously by triggering the Temporary Protection Directive, we did our part. We did it extraordinarily, as I think has just been mentioned. We did it very quickly from our side in making the proposal. The Council, in a week, it was a bit surreal. But it was great, obviously. I'd like to see more of it. But it looked easy. But I don't think it was as easy as it was made to seem. The French presidency most certainly played its part. So that's testament, I think, to the achievements. Of course, there was also the follow-up. Adopting and switching on the TPD mechanism was one thing, but there's all the follow-up, the implementation that we had to do as well. We very quickly stepped forward with, as you mentioned, the IPCR, but from our side, we also decided to institute this solidarity platform, which I think has been pretty central in acting as the sort of coordination hub and using also the resources that are available now at European level. We're much better equipped now, I think, through the support of the agencies, and in particular, since we're here today, of the Asylum Agency, and that's very noteworthy. I mean, the number of operating plans has increased dramatically. So the agency is there on the ground. The agency has also helped in Moldova. Obviously, can we do better for the future? Well, yes, I suppose it's very dangerous to say, no, we could not do anything better. So we have to look at and analyze and see what lessons we can learn. And there are things that we can draw from this, I'm sure, also for more broadly. How can we, for example, and this was part of our 10-point plan that we have presented in the Council with the Presidency, is also, for example, on this Safe Homes initiative to see what can we draw from this amazing collective effort from society as such in terms of offering it up homes. What are the things that worked, what didn't work, what should we take care of in the future, and what worked well. So I think we certainly can and need to assess that and take stock of it in various different directions. but certainly, as part of that reflection, we also need to look at the role the agency's played. It has stepped up and done a very good job.
Are there any reactions to each other, or should we pass to the next question? I think we can pass to the next question because we're on a schedule. But of course, it's a very good point regarding society, actually, and that this is not only about institutions and agencies, but about individual citizens who have many, many thousands of Europeans have proven European values and stepped up and welcomed Ukrainians into their houses and gone to the border and helped there as well, together with civil society. So it's a very good point. The next question is closely related to the first one. You can see it on the screen already, but specific to the TPD, to the Temporary Protection Directive. And the question is, has the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive changed the way we think about international protection in the EU? What does it mean for the reform of the common European asylum system? And so I think this time we'll go, Michael, sorry, you're up again. We'll go the other way, and then the next question we'll mix it up a bit.
Well, I think this is really interesting, this subject, and I think you could have a whole conference organized around this subject. But I'll just maybe throw in some ideas. I mean, first of all, the TPD has shown its utility. It's delivered. It's done above all what it was meant to do, which is to save the asylum systems. Because, quite frankly, with these numbers, the whole asylum system across the Union would have fallen apart. So we had to trigger it, and in that sense, it's done its job. We triggered it this time, and I think we looked at the circumstances. We really thought it was fit for this purpose, really fit, and you can see from the reaction of the member states and the council, you know, it was a view that was shared. So it was the instrument for this moment. And why could that be? Well, just the sheer scale, of course, but you can say, well, yes, but there were other mass movements. So I think beyond that, it was a country right in the neighborhood where you could say perhaps then there were other countries also in close proximity. But then there's the other element that I think is really crucial, which is the fact that Ukrainians had sort of a visa-free status, which meant that they had this ability to move freely across the Union. And I think that was what was transformative about this and made this really apt for these circumstances, because the TPD has a kind of solidarity provision, but it's a very light and certainly even a bit ambiguous. But that was fine. In fact, it was great for these circumstances, because we didn't need to sort of get drawn into the nitty-gritty and the difficulties of, you know, relocation quotas and all of this, because in effect, the individuals concerned were going to be able to relocate themselves, to move freely and find the place to go. The problems we had in terms of solidarity that we could deal with in the solidarity platform related to the logistics of this and the implications of all of this and the inevitable strains that would flow from handling such large numbers of people. And that's where the IPCR, the solidarity platform, the 10-point plan, all the follow-up, all the implementation elements have been so crucial. So I just wanted to put that out there. In terms of its implication for the reform of the Common European Asylum System, I think it's another example of how we've been rebuilding the mutual confidence between member states. And I think in that sense it's been very useful. I think we've shown that Europe can deliver, that we can work together, we can deliver solutions. What we have done with the TPD is quite remarkable. I don't want to be too complacent and too self-congratulatory about it, but it is an amazing achievement. And that's great. And I think we can build outwards from that positive experience. It can create the right atmospherics, the right dynamics. We can take also the benefits of this solidarity platform. We can read across, I think, some benefits from this. For example, the French presidency has done very good things in terms of working also on the pact and delivering a solidarity declaration as part of that gradual approach that they've been working upon. And we now, as the Commission, are very happily stepping up to try and help implement that and by coordinating it. And we will happily and readily step into that role. And we're also happy to see that with the European Parliament, there's a discussion going on, which I think is very, very positive, because this is co-decision when we come to the reforming of the system. And so we have to have good cooperation between both the Council and the European Parliament, and that's why it's very good to see this panel here has all sides represented.
Thank you very much. Nina, please.
Yes, thank you. I mean, not to reply the questions, because I do agree with Michael, they're highly complex, but just to add to those questions some of the thoughts which are, in fact, are going to be a question thoughts. So when we take a look at the situation of the future of building a common European asylum system and the impact of the implementation of temporary protection directive, whether this will have, let's say, a correlation in the future, I strongly believe that indeed, yes. I think that it goes without saying that this, let's say, experience that we have now with the implementation of temporary protection, I think, of course, it will mark the future discussion about this. I would say predominantly in 2 points. The first one would be discussion on solidarity in connection, I guess, with also with secondary movements. Because, of course, now with the temporary protection, we see, and Michael mentioned that if, in fact, people, of course, are moving freely, they are even encouraged to move from the first-line member states to further on in Europe. I mean, and this distribution, which, in fact, is, in a way, let's say, natural, automatic, whatever you call it, it's not forced, still will leave effect. That would be my first observation. Second observation would be, in fact, the question, so which elements from the pact that we have today on the table, I mean on the table in the Council, of course, and the Parliament, are needed or will need to remain or will need to be in place to assure the effective common European asylum system, which, of course, also encompasses or includes the temporary protection. So the screening regulations, or the screening procedure, the border procedure, to what extent. And then the third element, we can't have common European asylum system without a functioning return. We can't. I think that's the puzzle that, of course, we've, in a way, let's say, a bit acknowledged in the sense of course, focusing on Ukraine, because people are going back and forth. But I think that's the issue that I think we'll need to still address in the future discussions, together with partner countries, of course, and the mechanisms that are involved there. And I think, I mean, I'm being a bit bold there, but I think, and I wish, in fact, that also potential political discussions about the mutual recognition of the asylum statuses across Europe will, let's say, benefit from the temporary protection implementation, because I think this is something that Europe needs. That will be my humble contribution.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra.
Yeah, thank you. On this second question, I think it won't be so accurate to consider or to talk about a change in our approach of the international protection. As Michael mentioned, and actually Nina, we have sort of an experience, even bad experience for sure, but experience of movements of persons being displaced because of wars, because of internal conflicts, and some others. We manage to take or to tackle with this crisis, so and to set the responses that could be adapted, appropriate, as we mentioned in the first question. The situation in Ukraine and the activation of the TPDs seems to me to be in the same vein. It reveals the fact that we needed to have a clear system of registrations of the persons, of identifying the persons, identifying the needs for vulnerabilities for some of the persons that have specific needs for that, to channel them to the appropriate countries, even before individual relocations, or actually alternative relocation, if I may say. So on this specific point, I think there has just only been a confirmation of what we were used to do and what you used to do. For the French presidency, the TPD has shown, actually reveals, or actually made a confirmation that we needed to implement the tools that we already had. These tools being for the registration of the person, for some part on the control at the borders, knowing that the control should not take the same operational aspects that in some other crises. But we consider that it's made us confirm the point that we needed to have a system that should function and actually lead us to determine where the persons are eligible or not for asylum. We're not talking of asylum concerning the TPD for sure, but for the link with the reform of the CAS, we've seen the need to identify the persons to see how we could be taking them into account, taking into account all the aspects of the persons on the needs, procedural needs, reception needs, and some other needs. So the TPD hasn't changed really anything on our approach of the international protection. The only thing, and Michael mentioned it, was regarding the importance of the persons that we had to deal with. Nina mentioned a point that is quite crucial for us, is the screening regulation. Having persons coming with huge numbers does not entail that we should reject or actually put aside the way to control the person, to see who is entering the European Union, and to preserve the security of the Union, of the citizens. We were having all this discussion in a period of electoral campaign, and one of our main fears during that time was to have a security attack that could have puzzled everything in what we were doing. So we saw that it was of very importance to maintain the tools, the instruments that we had, and this is why we focus so much on the screening regulation, that we focus so much on the Eurodac regulation. We know that there are sort of different approach with the European Parliament. We were just discussing the point this morning, but we just consider that making a link with the reform of the CIS, we managed to have both approaches being reconciliated. The solidarity part regarding the way we welcome the persons, and this issue of responsibility by registering the person. This is why we actually had this important work on the solidarity platform regarding how we could be taking into account the identities of the persons, the documents, to see what could be the use of the Annex 2 of the Temporary Protection Directive, to see how we could give an identity to the persons and facilitate the allocation to the member states where they will be willing to be welcomed. We still have work to do. We still have some discussion with the EP, but we remain confident that we'll find an agreement on that, and perhaps lead to the efficient reform of the CIS.
Thank you. Please.
Yes.
Segues nicely into.
Yes. Thank you for giving me the floor. Well, the Temporary Protection Directive, it's an instrument that we had for 20 years. And for the first time, we are activating this directive, I should say, in a very historic, in the right moment. What we can see with the war in Ukraine, that there is internal distribution of refugees within the European Union, as Nino already mentioned, this mutual distribution. So we can see that one part of the refugees are not staying in the first country of entry. They are distributing themselves in the different European member states. So this means maybe that we need to rethink, to think in depth the principles of the first country, entry country principles, according to Dublin, and what these principles is causing to our refugee asylum policy. So the Ukrainians, they had the right to choose the member states, where to submit the applications, and I'm going to give you an example with Bulgaria, which is not the frontline member states. The government in Bulgaria gave 3 times more applications to Ukrainians than Romania Romania, it's a frontline member state. Why it happens? Because the Ukrainians, they see the country as a place where they can more adapt easily, where they can integrate themselves easily. So I think in the future, when we are talking about the asylum system, the European asylum system, we need to rethink this, to have in mind that the adaptation, the integration, it's a very important part, should be very important part of our asylum policy. We should take this into account. And something else that I would like to mention also, this is the border control. Some countries, some member states, they using a lot of funds, European, domestic, in order to have a stronger border control, to build even walls, fences, but we can see this doesn't work. We need really to have a very successful asylum system in order to deal with the future crisis.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there any reactions at all to each other, or should we move on to the next question? Maybe we'll move on because we're running out of time. Okay, so the third question, which you can see on the screen already, is, besides people fleeing Ukraine, Europe has seen a return to pre-pandemic levels of asylum applications, increasing by a third in 2021. And in fact, this has continued to increase in the first part of this year. Are these rising numbers a concern? And are we ready for a new potential crisis in the future? And I think what we'll do is maybe, Nina, you can go first this time so that we start with you.
All right, yes. No, I can, sure, we can share the numbers, of course, but you've seen numbers published, I guess, through our press releases and also, of course, through our portal, so the website. It's true what has been said indeed, so the one-third, let's say, numbers of increase for this year, it's very obvious. In 2021, we've had almost 650,000 asylum applications, and that number basically can be compared with the pre-pandemic, as we've seen in the previous panel, meaning that we are, yes, with numbers, I mean, comparable to what we've been facing in 2018. And 2019. So the question here is, of course, also the, I mean, ever-changing environment in our neighborhood. Of course, it's very obvious, and what is happening, or what has happened with the instrumentalization in Belarus, what in a way can potentially happen on our eastern border. Of course, what is going on now with the central Mediterranean route, when we see constant increase of people coming in. I mean, it's interesting to see also the nationalities that are coming through different routes, because this also has significantly changed. And of course, then also the Western Mediterranean route is apparently, on rise. So just to conclude that and leave the space for the discussion and further question, I think that from our end, of course, from the end of Asylum Agency, we do observe that, we analyze that, we have a forecasting mechanism in the agency, and of course, we gladly share this with stakeholders that would need to potentially address the possible, let's say, a crisis or maybe increased migration volume situation.
Okay, maybe Ms. Jancheva, since you were last before, we'll pass to you now.
Yes, what we can see, yes, there is a constant pressure, and also there's some stable migration routes that are used, and we are going to see that they're going to be active in the future, but at the same time, there are some ad hoc rise on some routes as well. So I believe you need to have better analysis. We need to constantly monitor all those routes. So we need to know what's going on in Afghanistan, Syria, in Africa, in order to prepare a system. I believe also that we need to work more on different possibilities on solidarity, including relocation, where and when this is, of course, possible and necessary. I believe that we need to somehow to decrease the pressure that the frontline member states are having, and to work more on the future allocation, because I don't believe that the countries that are frontline should take all the pressure from different migration routes. We need to work on this principle of solidarity, which is very, very tough questions among the different political parties. Of course, we need stronger coordination at the European level, and also we need to enhance support capabilities by the different European agencies and bodies.
Ms. Sanjo, and then we'll end with the Commission.
Yeah. I think we are aware of the new figures of the asylum applications, but for the French presidency, we consider that we should probably just have a different look on the routes regarding these asylum applicants. This is why I think in the Council, starting back to 2016 and actually before 2016, the idea has been always to determine to alleviate the burden on the member states by distinguishing at very early stages of the arrivals of the person between the persons that were in clear need of protection and the other persons. This is the internal aspects, and this calls back the reflection that we all need to have on the border procedures that Mrs. Mincheva mentioned, knowing that the French presidency has been calling to have effective border procedures to manage the migration and therefore to manage the pressure that exists for some of the member states. Another important point I think that we haven't mentioned in the fact to prevent the crisis and actually to manage the internal situation that some member states have is that we need to have a more effective action towards the countries of origin of the persons. This is why we reactivated, it was not only an activation, but we maintained the pressure on the migratory dialogues with the third countries to see and to bring them in the first hand to prevent illegal departures to the extent possible, and at the very end of the procedures to take into account or to readmit the nationals. I think it has been part of the idea that the Commission has in mind when it created as what that was called the seamless procedure of the Commission, knowing that we should take into account every step, every moment of the life of a migrant. So. As part of the French presidency, we committed ourselves to work on all those aspects coming forward from the prevention of illegal departures and working on the aspects of the return procedures. And on this point, we do welcome the appointment of a return coordinator, which we expect very, very great actions and very great results. And there will be some work to do. I think this will be one of the most effective points to work on, is that avoiding potential crises, we can't manage what can happen in different in the neighboring countries, but we can manage how we react on this situation in intern at the level of the European Union. One of these points, how to deal with the pressure, is to come back to the Dublin transfers. We talked about the returns, but we still have to work about the Dublin returns and work actually of effective returns of the asylum applicants that are not eligible for international protections. We have to continue our work with the third countries. And this is why at the very, very early moment, we think that, I'm coming back to it, the screening regulation that we managed, for which we managed to have a mandate as at the council level, will be very important to make a clear difference between the asylum applicants. Definitely, yes, we have to work on solidarity. We are working on solidarity. I just wanted to recall on this side that the declaration solidarity that proposed by the French presidency has been supported by 21 member states. Nina recalled the fact that it has been something that is more historical. So we are working on the solidarity, and it's just a first step for us to have this declaration, this solidarity declaration. The second step, and it will be left to the incoming presidencies, will be to work on the effective legislative part of the solidarity mechanism that has been proposed by the Commission in 2020. Potential crisis. Yes, I think we are ready for that, and we have the tools, we have the instruments that might help to tackle the situation. And I think it's just a collective responsibility of the member states, of the civil society for sure, but a collective responsibility even with the Parliament, with whom we're discussing on this idea of bringing up all of the files by the end of the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Schutter.
Thanks. Well, I mean, a lot of it has been very aptly said by everybody, but I mean, we see definitely rising numbers, and I think that in this sense we're getting back to pre-pandemic levels. We see that migratory flows have increased along all the main routes compared with the same period last year, and obviously as we move into full summer and also late summer, we can anticipate that this is the most challenging period. And this above all applies, I think, in the Mediterranean, along all the different routes. The situation in Libya has not improved. There's continued pressure or volatile situations we can identify along the different routes, along the central, eastern, western Mediterranean, as well as Atlantic routes. So this is one of the reasons why it's been very important for us, not in the midst of the biggest sort of displacement since the Second World War, also to take the eye off the ball of all these movements along the more traditional routes that we've become used to over the last years. and I think that this was something that the French presidency also took up in the discussion, because we've had discussions amongst ourselves here, and the question is, well, can we deal with these different things at the same time? Well, the other question is, can we not deal with them at the same time? We have to. It's not one or the other. I think we have to be able to look at all of them together. And of course, the Ukrainian crisis can feed and exacerbate also the other movements along the other routes, the more traditional routes of late. We can see risks ahead in terms of food supply, of rising energy prices, which will have, I think we can anticipate that, negative consequences in the neighborhood and beyond. And of course, these routes and all the complexities of what motivates people, but of course, poverty is a driver, and people will be under a great pressure. So, it's an unstable situation looking ahead. I don't think we should over-dramatize it, but I don't think we can be complacent looking ahead. So we have to use all the preparedness tools we have available. We've developed them over the last years. We've certainly better equipped than we were several years ago. We have this blueprint network, which is very useful, I think, in terms of gathering information from all different sources, including the agency. We have the IPCR. So we're well equipped to sort of monitor how things develop. And we have to be ready for that as best we can. Of course, all of this is cumulative. We have not had a rest from crises over the last year. We've had Afghanistan. We've had the situation at the Belarusian border, and now Ukraine as well. So, I mean, this does put an awful lot of strain cumulatively on member states. So, again, no reason to be complacent in any way. And it's why it's so important, I think, that we have to use all of our resources working together. And again, coming back to why I think the Solidarity Declaration and the gradual approach that has been pushed forward under this last presidency, in which we really need to continue with the upcoming presidencies, and we from our side will do everything we need to help in the implementation of that, because this is a very useful mechanism through the solidarity platform that we've developed to help mutually member states with any strains that are emerging. So we have to have preparedness, but we also have to use these tools that we are developing and that are where we are making progress. I think it's clear to use them to be as well prepared as we can for any new developments.
Okay, thank you. If there's no final words on this, I think we can pass to the Q&A session. We are actually quite significantly beyond our time limit, but we always underestimate, you know, these discussions are very interesting and it's well worth the delay, and we always underestimate how long it takes. So I think we have a lot of questions, and of course I also want to give opportunity for people in the room as well as the many questions we have online. But we are a bit short on time as well, so what we will do is, without any doubt, we won't get through all the questions. We'll probably manage 3 or 4. What we'll do is we'll try to collate the questions we see here online, and see if we can get back to you in writing at some stage in the near future. But I think it's very pertinent to what we've been discussing in the last hour or so. Is a question that keeps recurring, and which, Nina, you actually addressed in the first session as well, and which we at the EUAA keep getting all the time, which you get yourself often, which I know from my discussions with your colleagues, Michael in DG Home, you get a lot as well in the Commission, and I'm sure many others do. And it's about this, you know, TPD versus asylum. So I think it's a good opportunity to once again perhaps give our, you know, or clarify, let's say, the difference and why this was a good opportunity, was the opportunity to use TPD and activate it. So the question is, good morning and thank you all for this discussion. My question is why the Temporary Protection Directive was not activated previously by the EU, for example, in response to the refugees arriving in 2015. So this is a question we've heard, you know, recurrently in the past couple of weeks and months. But I think since we have this panel representing all the institutions here and our agency, I think it's a good opportunity to once again repeat and clarify why not before and why now. So in no particular order, maybe Dina, do you want to start?
I think this would be probably better in the hands of Michael, but then still, I mean, as I said in the previous panel, I think that there are 2 major elements of the points, because of course we use different legal frameworks, right? For the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive, indeed was used because there was really unprecedented massive influx into European Union. We're talking about millions of people that of course need our help and support, and of course in this respect, the recognition of the war situation through the activation of the TPD was obvious. That was the building, let's say, milestone for the activation. And of course, with that, then people prima facie have received, in a way, so the status after the registration. So there was no in-depth individual approach and analysis. Of course, they needed to be eligible, I mean, according to the temporary protection frame. But as I said, so in the discussion now, I think that this use of the TPD now, and this is what I want to point out here, will be highly relevant for the further discussion of common European asylum system. Of course, Commission in the pact already proposed, let's say, a bit of a, well, changed mechanism that would also address the potential future massive influx into the European Union, which is comparable to the TPD today. And I think this is, of course, part of the package. But I think that there are different questions that are arising now from the side of the implementation of the overall situation, as I've already mentioned them. And I think that this is going to be, let's say, crucial for the future debate. And why not deactivation back in 2015-16? If we take a look at just the numbers and the time frame, you will see the answer there. Of course, now we've received basically in 2 weeks, million and more people than we did back in 15 and 16 in 1 year and more. So I think that it is comparable. I think that there was a justified reason for the activation, but as I said, of course, that was also in the hands of the Commission and then in the hands of Member States and the Council to confirm that. With that, I will of course leave the answers to Michael and.
Michael, you already had mentioned it actually when you were speaking before, but perhaps you can, and then we'll pass on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think I maybe preempted the question by answering before. I think the crucial difference that I see is the fact that the Ukrainians had this sort of visa-free status, which was sort of transformative, and it made it, I would say, very clear to us that this was the moment to trigger this. It was certainly a mass influx. We needed to, and Nina's absolutely right, I mean, the sheer scale of it, but there were obviously enormous movements also back in 2015-16. But the circumstances were somewhat different at that time. I don't think we would have got back in 2015-16 the Council deciding this in a week. I think that the circumstances were different this time. Nina's also right. Maybe I just quickly say a word on our proposals in the pact, in the new pact which we made, because indeed we did continue to see the need in the new constellation of proposals of having a measure specifically directed at a crisis situation of a mass influx. It was intended actually to replace the Temporary Protection Directive, but not to sort of do away with it. I mean, the concept of immediate protection, of having a sort of that immediate protection status, is what we've got with the temporary protection, which takes the pressure off the asylum system, which is a no questions asked type of response, because you can't have the detailed analysis that you would get with an asylum application. That is sort of taken over into the philosophy of this proposal that the Commission made, but together with the wider philosophy of other measures of the pact, and building in the flexibility, the extra flexibility that you would need in a crisis situation when a member state system is confronted with enormous pressure. So I think that is a little bit the idea and the thinking behind our crisis proposal. But of course, it's normal, I think, to reflect now that we have triggered for the first time the Temporary Protection Directive, to take stock of what the experience is with that, which I think we can feed into the processes of co-decision.
Maybe Ms. Yoncheva, because of course the European Parliament is a very diverse place. I mean, there's different political opinions on different things, but there was quite some consensus on this. So I wonder what your thoughts on this activation was.
Yes, the European Parliament was calling several times for activating the TPD, but it didn't happen. I just want to remember that this directive was created during the Kosovo crisis, and the idea was really to manage the influx. So it's an emergency mechanism for providing international protection. But now the more important is really to analyze the positive outcome implementing this directive, and to see how you can make better instrument on creating our asylum policy.
Great. And Ms. Sandra, I end with you, because then the next question is also for you. So you're going to speak twice,
Okay.
so to say.
No, I couldn't agree much with what Michael just mentioned. Is that definitely there could have been a question on why we didn't activate the TPD before. But I think one other important point is to recall that between Ukraine and the European Union, there was no really sort of transit countries, so many transit countries that we could have for the other nationalities, and I think that the sudden outbreak and the figures, the important figures of the person, actually left us no other solution than to activate this mechanism. And one thing I want to point out is that we activated the TPD, we activated the rights that goes with the status of the persons being enjoying temporary protection, but we need to make it clear that all persons fleeing the war from Ukraine are not asylum seekers, and I think this actually is the real aim of the TPD, is not to alleviate to the maximum the burden of the member states. This is what we had so much different rights for the person enjoying temporary protection, and not to lead them or to channel them to the asylum protection. I think this is a major distinction or major point to be made to distinguish between the two systems.
The T in TPD, temporary.
Exactly.
Yeah. And can I just add one sentence? Because I think that, I mean, if we take a look at it from the perspective of Europe that protects, right? I think that what we need to, I mean, in these discussions of whether this is discriminatory or not, so the treatment of Ukrainians coming to Europe versus others, as you said, I think that we should point two things out. First is that, of course, European Union, it is a single space of protection. I think that we need to always bear this in mind. With activation of the TPD, I think we did two things. One, for sure, to protect those fleeing from war. Either they are visa-free or not, I mean, I don't think that is really relevant, but protecting them fleeing from obvious conflict and war. And second, we also, in a way, protected the asylum system, systems of, let's say, unique common European asylum system, so the asylum systems of the member states, because of indeed, if we would, let's say, push all people, millions into the asylum systems of European countries, that would collapse. And with that, also, we've protected asylum seekers that are coming from other places and not Ukraine. Because, of course, they still have the possibility to seek for protection and get it in European Union. So I think that this is the most important part of the overall story of the fast and efficient activation, because with that we've preserved both. I mean, the space of protection as European Union is and should be, the obvious, let's say, protection for those in millions fleeing to European Union because of the vicinity also, but at the end of the day, to protect the international protection space for those who are coming to Europe also from other places that, in fact, they are, let's say, well forced to.
Yes, it's a good point. I mean, with a 6 million person backlog, people applying from other countries would what happened in 2015-16 would pale in comparison, absolutely. Okay, so now we have a question from, if I'm reading the acronym of the name properly, I believe it's a journalist. Can the French presidency tell us the number of relocation pledges made so far in its temporary solidarity mechanism, as well as the number of relocation commitments? I don't know if you have the
this is a tricky
answer.
Question.
I don't know if you have the answer on hand, but or maybe to discuss it more broadly, and as well as the other colleagues, of course.
I think there has been public announcements made by some of our ministers during the last DHA Council. We are still discussing with most of the member states to get some commitments. We are very happy that we have a lot of member states. We have an important member states that were supportive of the declaration, that show willingness to relocate persons. We're still discussing with the form of the figures. So I'm afraid I won't be able to give an exact figure, but the thing is we are getting close to the target that we were envisaging, which will be quite important if we compare to what we had for the Alleviate mechanism in 2019, and we might be, we're still working with the member states, and hopefully we may be able to give a clear announcement by next week.
Wonderful. Well, that's encouraging to hear. Yeah. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that, or Should we move on? Okay. We're very late. I'm going to try to do 2 more questions, at least one from here. And if there's anybody in the audience, we'll give it to somebody in the audience. If not, we'll take another one from online. And this is about the, I'm sure we've all seen what's happened in the last couple of weeks, or week or so rather, in Melilla on the North African coast. And the question is simply, the current situation in Melilla last Friday, what do you think of the situation, I'm paraphrasing, on the Spanish border with Morocco? As we were discussing, I was discussing with Nina earlier, this is of course a cyclical recurrence which happens every year or so. So I just wonder if anybody has any thoughts on the situation and what's happening.
Okay, I'll kick off it. I mean, any loss of life is, of course, totally tragic, and here quite a few people seem to have lost their lives. But of course, it's a very challenging situation that Spain faces at that border. So I think that the way it's essential that Spain has a good cooperation with Moroccan authorities, and I think that that's something that is a constant in the policy there. It actually, that cooperation over time saves lives, I think, because what happens when that cooperation breaks down is, of course, chaotic scenes, and I don't think anyone wants to see that. So I think having a strong border is an essential component of a comprehensive, successful and stable regime, and that also involves working with partner countries. But of course, avoiding absolutely the loss of life, because we need to make sure that this cooperation takes place in line with all the standards that are laid down.
Anybody else want to weigh in, or?
Well, I just want to say that because of the situation because of the war in Ukraine and the situation in Africa, the economical situation in Africa probably will be quite worsening. So we can expect a big challenge in front of the European Union in the coming probably 1 or 2 years. So really we need very quickly to establish a common European asylum system. And this is in the hand of the European Parliament, in the hand of the Council, to finish these reforms till the end of this mandate, on the mandate of the European Parliament. So there are 5 presidencies, including the French one, and we hope to finish this legislation process. Because we need it, yes, in urgent matter. Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody in the audience have a question? I just want to give, if not, we'll take one more question from the attendees online. I don't see any hands, a very quiet audience today. Okay, so I have 2 interesting questions. I suppose I need to pick one. Okay. The EU has as its priority to limit irregular arrivals. This is said as a statement. Do you see complementary pathways as a tool to achieve this goal? And if so, how is the EU trying to scale them up? So this is about complementary pathways. So please, maybe the presidency wants to weigh in on that.
Yeah, for sure. They shall be working on the complementary pathways. We have the complementary pathways that are set for instance, for the Afghan citizens. We had some complementary pathways that has been set for the Syrians prior back to the crisis in 2015. And the Commission came recently with some proposals on the legal migration fields as well. So I think that we shall take it all in common and consider when and how to build on these common aspects to see how they might be having an effect on limiting irregular arrivals. But it just has to be clear that I think it's one of the points that we were discussing in our approach of the talent partnerships is that we need to have a coordinated cooperation with the third country nationals with whom we are discussing. Legal migration does not have to be seen only as sort of a trophy. It should be part of a discussion, a coordinated and equilibrated discussion between the European Union, the member states, and the countries of origin. And for sure, we need to have some legal pathways and safe pathways. Taking into part that we concluded quite recently last year the discussion of the EU blue card, which was supposed to welcome the persons highly skilled workers. We have on stage some others directive that are quite I would say dedicated to some specific aspects of our workers. So I think we have a wide range of tools that can help have some legal and safe pathways for the persons, and it's up to the member states to promote these kinds of tools. It's up to the third countries actually to see how they communicate with their nationals on the fact that we have legal and safe pathways and try to avoid taking risky paths to integrate the European Union.
Thank you. Ms. Grigori, the agency itself has also become increasingly active in resettlement, for example. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yes, for sure. That's the elements that this is a part of our mandate. I mean, already as the Asylum Support Office, we have, of course, tried to support member states when implementing the resettlement, and also we are, I mean, through our networks, in, of course, let's say, communication with member states and the experts on the field of resettlement and also the complementary pathways. I think that's what is here important is that, of course, we need to see complementary pathways as one of the elements of the official management of migration. And in this respect, the focus, of course, it's always a cooperation with the partner country, right? So I think it's overarching. I mean, you have a lot of initiatives and tools, as was mentioned, which of course can foster this, but then it always comes down to concrete implementation in concrete country of concrete, let's say, potential skilled workers which might find, of course, job in shortages of the labor market in particular countries. So I think that's from the, let's say, general, the level of, then down to the implementation. I think that's the challenge that we are facing as European Union always, and that's why I think that this element has huge potential, but I don't think that, I don't have the feeling that has been really, let's say, well, used up to well, even the needs or the necessity that this encompasses. I think there are a lot of work still to be done there, yeah, but we can't do that without working together with partners in third countries, of course not, no.
Mr. Schotter, Ms. Joncheva, do either of you have anything you want to contribute to this?
Yes, I think that we need more harmonized legal migration tools. This is important, and we need to work on that. Also, as a main tool, we need to use the resettlement mechanism, which we are not using it for the moment, and we need to push more on the solidarity mechanism. What we observed with great pain in Melilla, North African coast, it's the lack of this solidarity mechanism. Spain, it's a first entry point, and Spain doesn't deserve, any country doesn't deserve to be victim of his geography. Yeah.
Michael?
Yes, I think this is a very, very appropriate question. It's really an essential component of this comprehensive approach. You need these complementary pathways. It's not that having a strong border means that we're building a fortress here in Europe, and I don't think that's the message that we should send out to our partner countries. Take the example of Morocco, for example. It's about being able to build a partnership with that country, and that's why, for example, in the recent skills and talent package that the Commission came out with, we identified Morocco as one of the sort of first countries where we would like to develop talent partnerships, because we think that this is a really important part of having a mature relationship with partner countries, whereby there are possibilities, legal channels by which you can come to the Union. There are needs that we have on our side, and we can really identify a sort of win-win situation with partner countries where we also improve cooperation on a range of issues. But it's also good that you mentioned the question on the humanitarian side as well, because there's the resettlement pathways as well that we shouldn't forget about. And we really have a range of policy tools that we would like to develop in this area to enhance these complementary pathways. They can be complementary labour pathways, which combine also sort of the humanitarian and the sort of labour and more economic strands. You can even combine the two. And I think this is also something that we're interested in working with the UNHCR, which also has some experience in that field. And certainly the agency has also its role to play there. It has a good forum which helps, and also I think in Turkey, when we've been doing resettlements out of Turkey, the agency is quite active also in helping those resettlement efforts and helping member states in terms of liaison. So there's a range of issues that we can do, but this is really an essential component of the policy mix that we need to develop.
Absolutely. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are almost half an hour beyond our allotted time. I just want to, first of all, thank our dear panelists for taking time out of their very busy schedules to be here with us today. I think the discussion was quite relevant and hopefully interesting for everyone. Certainly it was for myself. Thank you for also taking the questions. I also want to thank the speakers at the first session again for presenting the report and also answering questions. And last but not least, of course, you, the audience, both here in the room with us here in Brussels, as well as those attending online. As is always the case, we were not able to get through all the questions. There's quite a lot of them. We will see if we can maybe collate them, as I said before, and reply in writing in one way or another. So we'll work on that. And just a reminder, of course, that the report is available on our website, as well as all the materials associated with it. You can find the link on our social media. You can find the link actually on the screen. There's a QR code here. And also, if you go to our homepage, you'll see a link to it on the homepage as well. So with that, just for those who are here, we have a light stand-up lunch, so networking lunch, if you are feeling hungry. And besides that, I thank you once again and I wish you a good rest of the day and a good week. Thank you.